It was a beautiful Friday evening, just the kind of night that made people want to go out and enjoy themselves. The sky had shifted to that deep indigo hue just before the stars twinkle into view, and the Golden Fork was packed, as usual. The buzz of conversation and the clinking of glasses filled the restaurant's air, mixing with the scent of freshly seared steaks and buttery lobster. It was the kind of place where people came to see and be seen, a hotspot for the elite. But behind the scenes, something was about to unfold that would turn this picture-perfect night upside down. Greg Miller, the Golden Fork's new manager, stood tall in his freshly pressed suit, surveying the dining room like a king watching over his kingdom. Greg loved this part of the job, keeping everything in line, making sure the guests fit the image of what the Golden Fork was known for: class, luxury, and exclusivity. His sharp eyes scanned the room, ensuring every table was in perfect order. He was the kind of manager who believed that his judgment was always right, and his authority was absolute. Everything looks perfect, Greg thought to himself, pleased with how smoothly the night was going. However, in a few moments, Greg's world of control was about to slip right through his fingers. The front doors swung open, and in walked a black couple. They were striking, dressed with effortless elegance. The man wore a tailored navy blue suit, and the woman in a sleek black dress with delicate gold accents looked every bit like they belonged in the upscale atmosphere of the Golden Fork. Their heads were held high, their movements graceful, and they walked with a quiet confidence that commanded attention. But that wasn't what Greg saw. From across the room, Greg's eyes narrowed, a sour look creeping over his face. "What are they doing here?" he muttered under his breath, unable to hide his displeasure. To Greg, something about them felt out of place, like they didn't belong. His mind jumped to conclusions, the kind based not on facts but on stereotypes, assumptions he never questioned. His pulse quickened with the certainty that he needed to do something fast. This was the moment when Greg made the biggest mistake of his life. Before the couple could even reach the hostess stand, Greg was already striding toward them. His shiny black shoes clicked sharply against the polished mahogany floor, echoing through the room. Guests glanced up from their plates as they noticed the unusually quick steps of the manager heading straight toward the entrance. "Excuse me," Greg said, cutting off the couple with a tight, forced smile. The man paused, raising an eyebrow. "Yes, we have a reservation tonight." The woman next to him remained calm, her expression unreadable, but there was a quiet power in her eyes that Greg completely missed. Greg barely glanced at the couple before looking down at the reservation book that Emma, the hostess, was holding. He didn't even pretend to check for their names. He had already decided. "I don't think we have any reservations under that name tonight. Are you sure you're in the right place?" His tone was condescending, his smile now completely gone. The woman's calm voice sliced through the tension like a blade. "We made our reservation a week ago. It's under the name Richardson." She didn't blink. She didn't falter. But Greg was determined to stick to his story. His pride and his arrogance wouldn't allow him to back down. "I'm afraid you must be mistaken," he said flatly, his arms crossing over his chest. "Perhaps you'd feel more comfortable at a different kind of restaurant. Before we continue, make sure you hit that like button if you're already feeling the drama. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories just like this one. You won't want to miss what happens next." The couple exchanged a glance. It was subtle, but anyone paying close attention could feel the shift in the air. The man's face remained calm, but there was a fire behind his eyes now. His patience was wearing thin. "We're not mistaken," Mr. Richardson said, this time more firmly. "We know where we made our reservation." At this point, Emma, the hostess, had caught the last bit of the conversation and quickly looked at the reservation list again, her eyes widening when she saw the name clearly marked for 7 p.m. "Actually, Mr. Richardson, I do see your reservation right here." Emma's voice was nervous. She could feel the tension building, and she didn't want to make things worse. But Greg, ignoring the hostess entirely, shot her a sharp glare that silenced her instantly. Greg's face was flushed with frustration now. His arrogance wouldn't let him back down in front of all these people. "I'll handle this," Greg snapped, not bothering to even look at the list Emma had pointed out. He turned back to the couple, his voice low and filled with an almost mocking tone. As I said, perhaps you'd be more comfortable somewhere else. Somewhere else? Mrs. Richardson repeated quietly, almost as if tasting the words. Her eyes hardened, but her voice remained level. I think you should reconsider that statement. Greg's smirk returned, confident that he had the upper hand. Oh, and why is that? The couple didn't flinch. Mr. Richardson took a slow breath before replying, because we own this restaurant. And just like that, the entire room seemed to freeze. Now I know you're hooked. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more gripping stories like this one. What happens next is going to shock you. Greg's face went pale. For a split second, he looked completely lost. What? He stammered. You own this restaurant? He struggled to make sense of the words, his mind scrambling for a way to recover. He opened his mouth, ready to say something, anything, but nothing came out. Emma, the hostess, let out a tiny gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. She knew exactly who they were now. Oh my God, it's them, she whispered under her breath. She had heard about the Richardsons, the wealthy power couple who had not only built the Golden Fork from the ground up, but had done so with the goal of creating a space that welcomed everyone, regardless of race, background, or status. And now, the very couple Greg had dismissed so coldly stood before him, owners of the very restaurant he thought he controlled. Mrs. Richardson's voice cut through the stunned silence. We built this place with our own hands, from the ground up. And tonight, you've managed to violate everything we stand for. Greg's knees felt weak as the weight of her words began to sink in. He glanced around the room, hoping for some kind of escape, but there was none. All eyes were on him now. His heart pounded in his chest as the realization hit him like a freight train. He had humiliated the owners of the restaurant in front of their own guests. I didn't know, Greg stammered, his voice shaky. You thought what? Mr. Richardson interrupted, his voice calm but steely. You thought we didn't belong here? Because of the color of our skin. Greg's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. His mind raced, trying to form an explanation, but nothing could save him now. He was caught and everyone in the room knew it. If you're just as stunned as Greg, make sure you hit that subscribe button now so you don't miss out on more powerful stories like this. We're only halfway through. The tension in the room had reached its breaking point. Even the other diners, who had been trying to enjoy their meals, could no longer ignore what was happening. Some were whispering to one another in disbelief. Others stared openly, unsure of what to do. One or two people even began filming on their phones, capturing every second of Greg's downfall. But the Richardsons weren't done. Mrs. Richardson stepped forward, her voice steady and filled with authority. What you've done tonight is not only unprofessional, it's disgusting. You treated us as if we were less than human. And for what? Because you thought we didn't belong in a restaurant we own. She paused, letting her words sink in. We have zero tolerance for discrimination in any form, especially in our own establishment. You've just proven that you're not fit to represent what we stand for. Greg's face had gone from pale to bright red. His entire body felt heavy, as if the weight of the world was pressing down on him. He knew what was coming next, but he couldn't bring himself to face it. Before he could say another word, the head of security appeared by his side, his expression unreadable but professional. Mrs. Richardson gave a simple nod, and that was all the signal security needed. Escort him out, she said calmly. Security moved in, and without a word, they took hold of Greg's arm and began guiding him toward the exit. Greg's feet felt like lead, dragging across the polished floor as the eyes of the staff, guests, and the Richardsons bore into him. The dining room, once filled with laughter and clinking glasses, was now a sea of whispers and murmurs. Greg's mind raced. How did this happen? How could I have been so wrong? But no answer came, and as he crossed the threshold, he realized he had lost everything in a single night because of his own arrogance, his own prejudice. The restaurant doors closed behind him with a heavy thud, and just like that, Greg Miller, the once confident manager of the Golden Fork, was gone. Outside, he stood in the cool night air, his heart pounding as the realization of his downfall fully hit him. But there was no going back now. Inside, the tension slowly began to dissipate. Mrs. Richardson straightened her posture and turned to the guests and staff who had witnessed the entire scene unfold. Her calm yet commanding presence instantly filled the room with a sense of relief. Mr. Richardson stood beside her, his hand gently resting on the small of her back as he stepped forward to address everyone. "We sincerely apologize for the disruption tonight," he began, his voice strong but reassuring. "We want you all to know that what you just witnessed does not reflect the values of the Golden Fork or the people who work here. We've built this establishment with one goal in mind: to create a place where everyone feels welcome, no matter who they are or where they come from." His words hung in the air, and slowly, the guests began to nod in agreement. The couple's unwavering confidence and composure under pressure was inspiring. They had stood up to blatant discrimination without losing their grace, and everyone in that room knew it. Mrs. Richardson spoke next, her voice warm but firm. "We won't tolerate behavior like what you saw tonight, ever, and we will be taking immediate steps to ensure it never happens again." The room was quiet, but a sense of respect filled the air. Then, slowly, a few diners started clapping. The sound spread throughout the restaurant until nearly every guest was applauding, showing their support for the Richardsons and their stand against injustice. Now, if you were moved by this moment, don't forget to hit that like button and share the story with someone who needs to hear it. Also, make sure to subscribe so you never miss stories like these. As the applause died down, the Richardsons took a moment to compose themselves. They weren't just standing up for themselves, they were standing up for everyone who had ever been judged, dismissed, or made to feel like they didn't belong. It wasn't just about their restaurant, it was about something bigger. The night continued, but the mood in the room had changed. It was as if the incident had drawn everyone closer together. The staff worked with renewed purpose, and the diners, many of whom had been watching silently, felt a deeper connection to the restaurant and its mission. Later that night, when the last guest had left and the restaurant was finally quiet, the Richardsons sat together at a table near the window. They looked out onto the street, where the lights of the city twinkled in the distance. It had been a long day, but they had stood firm in their values. They had confronted prejudice head-on, and in doing so had made a statement not only to their staff and guests but to the world. The next morning, headlines were buzzing with the story. Racist restaurant manager fired after confronting black owners of popular fine dining spot was plastered across local news sites and social media feeds. Videos of the incident, captured by a few diners, had gone viral overnight, sparking widespread outrage and conversation about discrimination in the service industry. People were shocked, not just by Greg's blatant racism, but by how calmly and powerfully the Richardsons had handled the situation. The story touched a nerve, and soon, it wasn't just a local scandal. It was a national conversation. Before we dive deeper into what happened next, don't forget to subscribe and share this story. Your support helps us keep bringing you powerful content like this. By midday, news outlets had picked up the story. Reporters reached out to the Richardsons for interviews, wanting to hear directly from them about the experience. Mr. and Mrs. Richardson, now the center of attention, agreed to speak, not to seek sympathy, but to drive home a message they believed the world needed to hear. In a televised interview, Mrs. Richardson sat gracefully beside her husband. She spoke with the same quiet strength that had marked her presence the night before. "What happened at the Golden Fork wasn't just about us," she explained. "It's about changing the way we look at each other as human beings. No one should be judged or treated differently because of the color of their skin. It's heartbreaking that in this day and age, we still have to confront these kinds of biases, but we're not going to let it slide." Mr. Richardson nodded, adding, "We built this restaurant from nothing, and we built it on the values of inclusion, respect, and dignity. We want everyone who walks through our doors to feel welcomed, whether you're a regular or stepping in for the first time. What happened with Greg was a harsh reminder that we still have work to do, but we're committed to leading that change, starting with our own business." The interview resonated deeply with viewers, And soon the Richardsons were being lauded not just for their success as restaurateurs, but for their integrity and courage in standing up for what was right. Meanwhile, things were spiraling out of control for Greg. His name had gone viral alongside the story, and his face had been plastered across social media and news outlets. Everywhere he looked, people were talking about him, and not in a good way. He had become a symbol of what happens when someone lets their prejudices dictate their actions, and the consequences were swift. In a matter of days, Greg's personal and professional life crumbled. Word spread quickly through the restaurant industry, and job offers dried up almost instantly. No one wanted to hire the man who had publicly humiliated himself by throwing out his own bosses, especially under such disgraceful circumstances. Greg tried to issue a public apology, posting a long message on social media about how he had made a mistake and how he was sorry for any offense caused. But the apology fell flat. People saw right through it. It wasn't sincere, it was just damage control, and the public wasn't buying it. Comment after comment rolled in, tearing Greg apart for his actions. Too little, too late. You're only sorry because you got caught. This is what happens when you let racism run your life. His social media accounts were flooded with backlash, and before long, Greg was forced to go dark, shutting down his profiles to escape the wave of criticism. It wasn't just strangers who turned on Greg, though. His own friends and family began to distance themselves. They didn't want to be associated with him now that his name had become synonymous with racism and discrimination. In the end, Greg was left alone, with nothing but the bitter consequences of his actions to keep him company. Back at the Golden Fork, business was booming like never before. The story of the Richardsons' stand against discrimination had struck a chord with the community. People wanted to support the restaurant that had taken such a clear stance against racism, and reservations began pouring in. The phones rang off the hook, and tables were booked solid for weeks. Even beyond the surge in business, the Golden Fork had become a symbol of hope and progress. Customers weren't just coming for the food anymore. They were coming to support a cause. They were coming to stand with the Richardsons to show that they, too, believed in a world where everyone was treated with respect and dignity, no matter the color of their skin. The Richardsons, for their part, knew they had been given a platform, and they weren't about to waste it. They worked tirelessly behind the scenes to make sure that what had happened with Greg would never happen again. They implemented new diversity and inclusion training for all of their staff, ensuring that everyone, from the kitchen to the front of the house, understood the values that the Golden Fork stood for. Months later, as the restaurant celebrated its 10th anniversary, the Richardsons stood before a packed dining room filled with loyal customers, friends, and staff. They took a moment to reflect on the journey they had been through and the lessons they had learned. "What happened with Greg was painful," Mr. Richardson said, addressing the room. "But it was also a turning point. It forced us to look at ourselves and ask how we can be better, not just as business owners, but as human beings. And I think that's something we should all strive for." Mrs. Richardson added, "Diversity isn't just about who's in the room. It's about making sure everyone feels like they belong. That's the kind of world we want to build, and we're proud to start right here at the Golden Fork." The room erupted into applause, loud, thunderous applause that echoed through the restaurant and out into the night. It wasn't just applause for a great meal or a successful business. It was applause for something much bigger, a celebration of progress, of standing up to prejudice, and of the kind of world that the Richardsons and so many others were working to create. If the story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this. Together, we can spread messages of hope, equality, and standing up for what's right. You won't want to miss the incredible stories we have coming up. Asterisk asterisk. As the Golden Fork continued to thrive, the Richardsons became well known not only in their local community, but also across the country. Their story of courage and resilience resonated with people from all walks of life. They were invited to speak at events, on talk shows, and at conferences about their experience and the importance of inclusion and fighting discrimination in everyday life. The couple's message was clear. Standing up against racism wasn't a one-time event, but a continuous commitment. Their voices became a source of inspiration, and they used their platform to advocate for change not only within the restaurant industry, but in workplaces and communities everywhere. In the months that followed, the Golden Fork established several initiatives aimed at promoting diversity and inclusion. They partnered with local schools to create internship programs for young people from underrepresented communities, offering them opportunities to learn about the restaurant business. They also began hosting community dinners where people of all backgrounds could come together and share a meal, fostering understanding and breaking down barriers in the process. If you're inspired by the way the Richardsons turned a negative situation into a positive movement, hit that like button and share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, subscribing to this channel means you're supporting stories that truly make a difference. One of the Richardsons' proudest achievements came a year later when they launched a foundation dedicated to promoting equality and fighting discrimination. The foundation, named Together Forward, focused on education, community engagement, and leadership training, helping to equip the next generation with the tools they needed to create a more inclusive world. The Richardsons' leadership, both in their business and in the community, was widely recognized. They received awards for their work in promoting diversity and inclusion, and their restaurant became a model for other businesses to follow. Despite all the success and recognition, the Richardsons remained humble. They knew that the fight against racism and inequality was far from over, but they also knew that they had made a difference, starting in their own restaurant and spreading far beyond it. Thank you for sticking with this story until the end. If you found it powerful, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share it with others. Let's keep this conversation going, and together we can create the kind of world we all want to live in. Don't forget to subscribe for more content that inspires and motivates. See you in the next video. As the story of the Golden Fork and the Richardsons' journey continued to spread, people around the world were reminded that even in the face of adversity, standing up for what's right can create lasting change. What began as a shocking incident of discrimination had transformed into a powerful movement for inclusion, respect, and unity. And it all started with two people who refused to let hate define them. Let me see what you guys think about this story.